Staying on this Saturday card, Justin, SEC over to that conference. Alabama projected to be, big game, 2-point road favorite at Kentucky. Haslam has this closer to Alabama, a little bit short of a 1-point favorite. I'm right there with the Haslam projection. Total, like I mentioned from the get-go on this Outside Shots podcast, projected to be in the 190 range. Where are you looking for this game, if you are at all?
This is going to be a really, really interesting one. The game of the day, without a doubt. I'm at the top of all the thrill score, excitement ratings out there. Kentucky, I still think this is a really nice spot to grab the home dog, honestly, here in Rupp Arena. I do think Kentucky can get right off of, what was a pretty tough, awesome shot for LSU, but a tough loss. And Kentucky, they got their guy. I mean, what you're seeing out of Rob Dillingham is awesome. Antonio Reeves, DJ Wagner, the supporting cast looks good. I think this is going to be a packed house. Alabama's offense looks great, but their defense, it leaves a few questions, right? Like, this is maybe one of the most efficient offenses we've ever seen in one of the most efficient years we've ever seen. But their defense, ranks outside the top 70 on KenPom. So I do think that we could see this one really approach that 180-point range. I do very naturally lean towards the under just on high numbers. I just can't help it. But I'm going to stay off that, lean towards Kentucky. This has been a very good run for Alabama. They've only dropped 2 games. They were at Tennessee, at Auburn, but even though those teams were top 10 in KenPom's rankings when they went there, this is a tough one. This is a really, Kentucky is still Kentucky. So I do expect them to get up for this game. Alabama has made these big runs. This would be a great win for Kentucky as a program coming off that loss. They've had a tough go, lost to Gonzaga, lost to Florida at home in OT. I don't think they're going to suffer their 4th home loss of the season. Give me that. They'll be their 5th. They lost to Wilmington. I forgot about that one early in the season. Yeah, I think they get the win at home. I'll take the money line on Kentucky if I'm making a play.
I want to dig into the numbers here in a second when it comes to both teams, but where do you think the market opens this line? Because you said Kentucky, and the projections agree, Kentucky a home dog, but I mean, when we talk about the market shading towards spots, it's going to shade towards Kentucky, no? Right?
Yeah. It's going to open as a pick 'em, if I had to guess. Maybe -1 for Kentucky if the market's over aggressive and trying to beat the public or, the sharp money or whoever is loving these spots over time that continues to bring the line, 2-3 points off the KenPom number in favor of these home teams in these big spots. So, I think if you're thinking about that, again, it's tough. It's tough. You don't really want to pay that price. I'd like to get Kentucky on the money line at like +105, but it's probably going to be -110, -115. And it's a little bit of a tougher pill to swallow, but I think here it's the right call, independent of the line. I think the handicap is that Kentucky gets the win.
Yeah, and it's a great spot, like you mentioned, coming off of that LSU loss and a look-ahead spot to this game. Right. A couple of concerns for me, though, coming out of it, not that nobody else does, because, Kentucky's defense regressed after they played well against Ole Miss, played well at Auburn. I thought, going back to that Saturday loss for my Tigers futures, I thought Auburn was kind of shocked. Because Jalen Williams goes down in the second half, which kind of took some steam out of their momentum. But also Kentucky just flame-throwing defensively, especially Onyenso around the basket in the first half to really string some of those transition opportunities ahead. But Kentucky allowing 1.06 points per possession at LSU. I know you said Rob Dillingham is a bucket, which he is, and probably one of the more underrated shots of the season. Contested shot to take the lead before Tyrell Ward had the putback. But whose man was that at the other end of the floor? It was Rob Dillingham.
Right, yeah. No, I understand.
Another defensive lapse. And then one last thing before you maybe counter or agree with the defensive issues. Yeah. Kentucky 12-2 when Dillingham plays fewer than 24 minutes. I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, it's a little damning, isn't it? And shot quality's been kind of against what Kentucky's been about this year, has them as pretty lucky, especially around the spread number. It's kind of mind blowing to see 15 and 11 ATS per where shot quality is marked to the closing lines. Of course, books and all that stuff, it could vary a little bit, but the shot quality ATS record is 5 and 21. Pretty unbelievable to see. Their shot quality record is 13 and 13 on the year, which is a little bit different than the 18 and 8 that they are right now. So yeah, they've really gotten this to this point by keeping control of the ball, moving fast, and being very, very efficient shooting from three. They lead shot quality and 3-point efficiency. So I do think there's obvious defensive lapse. Their defense does really just give up far too many points, especially on threes. They do allow like one of the worst clips in terms of off the dribble threes, which usually means that you're able to make space against them. And I would imagine that it correlates pretty well to a bad defensive spacing, outside the top 200. So there's a lot to be desired here. They're not forcing a lot of turnovers either. So it could be, I could see this one soaring over, man. We could get 190 points. It's crazy to say, but it's very possible. Just trading buckets, high power game. I think the only thing I know for certain about this one is I am definitely tuning in to watch it.
Absolutely. And one other thing that kind of benefits Kentucky should be getting back or potentially getting back Trey Mitchell from the shoulder injury, which would help out spacing Alabama's defense when Kentucky's on offense, but also defensively. I know Trey Mitchell isn't the best when it comes to ball screen coverage, but Kentucky's defense has been struggling mightily in that category with him out. So you would think it would be a net positive for them defensively, but with the way their guards are handling dribble penetration, and to your point, off the dribble threes, who knows? One other thing on Alabama, I thought Florida, even though they dominated the offensive glass just like Texas A&M did and converted on their opportunities to cover despite losing at Alabama, I still thought the Gators got a little bit fortunate just because Alabama shot around 25% from three. I know defensively that's another story because Alabama can't stop a nosebleed either like Kentucky, but got unlucky when it came to open threes, especially in the first half. And then one last thing too, when we mention poor defensive teams in the tournament, whether it be Kentucky or Alabama, Kentucky especially going to be a very tough bracket team to figure out. But when you look at since 2003, there have been 5 Final Four teams with a defense ranked outside of the top 170. Marquette, Butler, that was going back to, I think, their first tournament run when they were ranked, let's see here, I think, outside the top 70, 72nd in adjusted defensive efficiency. VCU, UCLA, going back to that run to the Final Four a few years ago in 2021, and then Miami last year. So it does happen when you get explosive guard play, but it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, it does. It does really take like some special guard play. And I think Miami last year, forwards too. It wasn't like it was just one dimensional, right? So I think it does take a special offense to outweigh that. And I mean, Alabama, both these offenses probably have the offensive firepower to make you forget about some of those woes. Again, Kentucky's defense, there's so much worry about opponents shooting against them. To me, they don't defend the mid-range well. They do force a good amount of mid-range, but the shooting has been so hot. I feel like, honestly, I'm pretty out on Kentucky in terms of the long-term look. I would never take a future on this team. I would never take, even like Elite 8, Sweet 16. It's just not worth it to me because they've been electrically hot, right? You don't just sit there and have a 1.18 points per possession this season. It's ungodly. 1.09 is where shot quality expects. And then on defense too, 1.04 current versus 1.09. So they're waiting to have this regression. Like I said, that massive difference between shot quality spread and actual spread result. I trust long-term shot quality is going to get that right more times than not. You simulate the end of this season, the Kentucky tournament run 10,000 times this season based on what we've seen. I would expect them not to return value more often than not. So Kentucky's a little bit of a stay away. This game specifically, of course, game to game, it's very different. But like I'm talking about, like I think they will eventually just have a game where they just can't hit their shots. Is that going to be this one? I don't know, but it's probably coming. They're gonna have this terrible regression shooting game at some point, and I hope for their sake it's against Vanderbilt at home and not in the second round of the tournament, because they are a fun team, and I do like Dillingham, and I do like these offensive powerhouse teams. It's fun. It's kind of where college basketball seems to be shifting. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, and going back to something that Steven and I were discussing on the early week show, you generally want to back a high volume 3-point shooting team that can lead to high variance one way or the other when they're a double-digit dog or a long shot to make an NCAA tournament run, kind of like Clemson in a sense, at around 27-1 to make the Final Four. Alabama, the one reason why I like them a little bit more than Kentucky, because if they have an off shooting night, both teams are poor defensively, like we discussed, but they're pretty good on the offensive glass, like we saw yesterday against Florida, and overall this season ranking inside the top 25 in offensive rebounding rate. So they do attack that area when the shots don't go down. And also, Wrightsell didn't play, one of their better 3-point shooters. Just one little note against Florida, which might have limited some of those 3-point makes in the first half, like I was hitting on. But offensive rebounding wise, Estrada 5 offensive boards against Florida. Griffin had 4. So the effort is there. Pringle off the bench too, who was, I think, starting for stretches last year, had 8 rebounds overall, 3 on the offensive glass. So just one reason why maybe I think Alabama might have a bit more upside come the tournament.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting the nail on the head with it. It's hard to not, love, be enamored. I don't know if you saw that shot chart the other day. They're shooting the right way. They're going to the rim. They're taking the threes. I think they probably, the only other team, like we just said, was Cornell. That's sort of doing it more. So yeah, I will always support Alabama in that sense. Kentucky, I think, wants to be what Alabama is, and that's why we're seeing this line is going to be really tight, even with the spot. Alabama is the more elite version kind of right now.
Yeah, and Calipari was clearly prepping for the game last night, only taking 2 post-game press conference questions and then saying he had to dip out of there because it was an early game on Saturday. This one tips at 4 p.m. Eastern time against the Tide. So that was just odd. He's talking trash to the media after the win at Auburn, and then that's Cal for you. I'm not saying that it's unexpected, but like, what are you doing, man? Kind of thing. Kind of like Pitino. At least his players came to his defense after they came back, nearly blew another lead, but somehow hung out against Georgetown last night on a Wednesday.